very much for being with us this morning. We have a great panel. My name is Naughton. I'm with Purpose-Built Communities, and with me are three of the folks who run the community quarterback organizations in Eastlake in Atlanta, in the Bayou District in New Orleans, and in the Sharpston neighborhood of Houston. And I'm delighted that everybody is here today. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation about kind of what does victory look like? What's our end game? What are we trying to get to? And the reason we've asked these three here is because they're all very different stages of this community revitalization process. Recognizing that we're all in it to win it, and we're all in it for the long term, what does that look like? So with me today are Ann Whitlock from Houston, who you've been the ED for how long now?
About 8.5 months.
8.5 months, less than a year, a real newbie. Gerry Barousse, who's the chair of the board of the Bayou District Foundation, and Gerry, 10 years? 10 years, just finished, just really celebrating your 10th anniversary right about now.
Yep.
That's a great, and Danny Shoy from the Eastlake Foundation. Danny, how long have you been in this work, and how long has the Eastlake Foundation been at it?
So the Eastlake Foundation's been at it, for 20 years. And I've been with the Eastlake Foundation 5 years and been president for 1 year, 11 months, and 21 days.
That's perfect. And I had one of those monumental anniversaries this year. This summer, I celebrated my 20th anniversary of working on the Eastlake revitalization in one capacity or another. And I went, oh my God, 20 years. The only thing that I've really done for more than 20 years is be married and be a mom. So it was a really kind of exciting recognition, but also kind of startling in terms of thinking about how long this work takes and how it evolves over time. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. So I'm going to start with Ann, who's our newest person. I'm going to ask Ann to talk about, from her perspective today, kind of what does victory feel like it's going to be in the future? What are you looking for? And tell us maybe about some small victories that you've experienced over the last few months that kind of give you the confidence you're moving in the right direction.
Right. Well, I think, as a fledgling operation, one of the most important pieces for us is to, within the partnership, gain the trust and the mutual understanding of what we're doing and where we're heading. And I think that we are on the road to really getting that fully aligned with all four of our partners.
Tell us about your founding partners and who they are and what they all do.
So we have, as our four organizations, KIPP Charter School, Legacy Community Health Services, the YMCA, and St. Luke's United Methodist Church. And so it's a great group. It's probably a little bit different than some of the other purpose-built communities with the faith-based organization, but we feel like that has really added a spectacular element to our community development strategy. And so really, as we think about building trust and consensus, victories are creating that line of communication for open and frank discussion, but also having each other's backs. And that's a tricky line sometimes, because you got to push people, but then you also have to support people. So we, I think, have done a really good job. I mean, our operating group is very tight. Our board is stepping in to really, I think the really important piece is that the board buys in, not only buys in, but leans in, and then isn't fully all in. And we've had a trajectory of that. And I feel like at this moment, we're really at a good place to start moving in the right direction. But in terms of small victories, I think for us, one of the, we have a charter school as a partner, but we work very closely with the public Houston ISD. So we have one elementary school in our impact zone that we're working with, and that can be a tricky proposition with a charter, but we believe that there are lessons to be learned from both sides of that equation, and what are the best practices that each of these organizations can share with each other and with the community, because ultimately the public schools are going to be feeding into the charter schools, so they're also vested in having a good working elementary school from the public side. So I think that's been a win. And then also just from an operational standpoint, we have, each of our partners has chosen a connect officer whose responsibility is partly to think about the partnership and really advocate within their own organizations for the leaning in of their organization and the communication and buy-in up and down the chain, because it's not just good enough to be at the board level or at the kind of executive level. It has to be down to the front desk, and everyone has to understand what Connect is and what they can do.
I love that idea, so that there's somebody whose job it is to be putting the Connect filter through their operational work and their own partners. So somebody asking the question on a regular basis, a daily basis, how does this relate to the partners? How does this relate to everything else that we're trying to achieve collectively? And if we want to change doing something, how's it going to impact everybody else?
Correct.
That's really interesting. Very smart. Well, thank you. So, Gerry, 10 years. We just passed the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And you had not been involved in this kind of work before Katrina. Would you spend a few minutes, if you don't mind, kind of telling your story about how you got kind of interested in this work and where you've taken it?
Well, obviously, Katrina was a life-changing event for everybody in New Orleans, and I think part of our thinking about what New Orleans was going to be, how New Orleans was going to change, whether it was a place we wanted to live, whether it was a place we wanted to move back to, was really kind of the genesis of, well, if we're going to be here, if we're going to be a part of this, we need to be a part of the change, we need to be a part of the solution. And so changing what you were thinking about civically and in the business community to being something that was a more active role versus a passive role, an investor, and really more of a leader. And I think that the community quarterback model evolved from that. I think the one thing that we talked about this panel in our call a month ago, I don't think you can talk about victory in this work. We're never going to be able to claim victory. We can talk about how we're gaining little successes and celebrate each of those little successes, but I don't think you can ever claim victory. And I think that's one of the things that what keeps us in the work is being able to have those little successes where we're able to say, okay, we put this team together. We were able to work through and convince the city council to demolish all the major public housing complexes in New Orleans. We were able to move people into a community and convince a housing authority that mixed income housing made sense. Being able to ultimately bring children into a new early learning center that, quite honestly, if you talk to educators across, or the people that were leading educational change across the city and the state, they didn't think that 0 to 3 mattered. And being able to convince them, they're still not funding it at the state level, but to understand that first 3 years is really important, and to convince the business community of that, I think is kind of the culmination of how you bring the parties together and how you're able to celebrate those little victories.
So I want to come back to your early work, and each of you think and share with us a little bit about the process of building trust and building relationships in the community and how that's gone, what the challenges have been there, and how that continues to evolve. And Anne, why don't you start with this?
Okay, well, we're a little bit different, I think, than many of the communities in the room today. Our community is predominantly, probably 2/3, first generation Hispanic, many of them with not documented. So, it's hard to engage at a deeper level. And then we also have probably another 1/3 refugees from Houston is the biggest resettler of refugees in the country. So we have, 30,000 refugees in Houston. And so the challenges for us particularly are around language, culture, and even within the community, it's very fragmented. The Cubans don't like to talk to the Central Americans, and the Muslims don't talk to the Hindis, and so it's particularly challenging to try to navigate those waters, you know, especially as a 6-foot white girl. You know, I have to work pretty hard. But you know, I was in Peace Corps, so I kind of come from that background of I embrace cultures from all over, and that's what really excites me about the work. But in terms of building trust, I have a little story that kind of, for me, really encapsulates the work that we do. And so we work a lot, since we don't have a building, all of our partners work a lot in the apartment buildings because we don't have a real estate piece. We're in the most dense area of Houston. We have 15,000 people in a 1-mile radius. So we do a lot of work in the apartments. And so I was working with our Y partner to do, she was doing Zumba classes in this apartment building, which is predominantly Muslim, South Asian. And so all of our participants were women, fully hijabed, only their eyes showing, and we were Zumbaing. And this went on. We did it several weeks, and finally, one of the women came in and she closed all the slats on the windows, and she took off her headscarf and she said, "Meet my face." And that was like a true honor for me, because that showed me that she was starting to trust the fact that we were being consistent and we were coming back and we were having conversations. And to me, that is the crux of the work, right? It's the fun stuff, but it's hard and it's slow, but it's absolutely critical. And so those are the kinds of things that we do with our partners every day. And so I feel like ours is a real grassroots community development work, much more than infrastructure.
Very nice. I love that. Meet my face.
Meet my
What an
face.
intimate experience.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah. Gerry, you guys, again, coming up and starting this after Katrina in a project that probably needed to happen before Katrina, but hadn't. And the storm created, incredibly difficult situations for everybody in the community, particularly people who had to move away in such dire circumstances. How did you guys go about kind of building trust, building some relationships, building political consensus on kind of the next step forward?
Well, I think a big part of the work was identifying what your model was, who those partners were that you needed to have, really understanding the stakeholders in the game. We had 900 families that had moved across the country, and identifying and finding them, and bringing those that wanted to come back, and having them engaged in community meetings and the like. One of the things we talk about a lot is, as we have engaged partners and gotten them to think about the work and how they work with us and in doing their work, but in supporting ours, is when we created the vision, making people think it was their idea. How do you get? We can think back to the taking all of our city council members to Atlanta to see East Lake, and to think, none of them understood mixed income. The housing authority didn't understand mixed income. How are we going to take this on? And by the time we had done that and had these 3 or 4 trips, our city councilwoman, it was her idea. Just ask her. When we had our conference 3 years ago in New Orleans, she told us it was her idea. But you get to that level of buy-in, and you've got the champion in City Hall that is going to do what needs to happen. We had a lot of really interesting community meetings, but because there was such a distrust of the housing authority, this was something that was new. It was change. And so, you've got to be able to listen. You've got to be able to react. But you've also got to be able to have the line that you're trying to stay on, instead of getting diverted too many times.
So I'm thinking of a couple of our speakers during the course of this conference. Thinking about Reverend Jeff Brown on our Friday night speaker, and I know, Gerry, you did not have the opportunity to hear him, but one of the first things he talked about as he was beginning to build trust and authentic relationships in the community was consistency, was coming back time and time again, even if nobody was talking to you, but just continuing to come back. And I know that's something that you and your team did. You kept coming back even when coming back was very difficult. The other thing is creating a durable plan. As we heard Patrick Sharkey talk today about kind of some of the elements of good urban policy, durability, and something that will last long term. What you all have been doing, I think, meets that measure of creating things that are not going to be flash in the pans, let everybody get excited and, you know, declare victory after 3 years and go home. You're all here for the long run. So I want to switch to my friend at the end, who's here for now in year 20. Leaders change, residents change. Despite the fact that we went through this, you know, enormously complex and difficult trust building process 20 years ago in the East Lake neighborhood, building relationships, building consensus with the people who lived there then. 20 years from now, it's a different group of folks. People age out, some die, some move on, some buy houses, but it's a different group of people. And so now you've got to do you've got to continue that trust building or start over, or maybe with some of your institutional partners. Would you like to shed some light on that?
I'm so glad that you asked that, because there is an assumption that what happened 20 years ago in Eastlake was a moment in time, and we're now on good grace with everyone, and there's no more work to be done. And I think what you said, Carol, is key, and that's about being authentic. You know, all of you have heard the story that Carol shares, her personal story about meeting Eva Davis, who had been the president of the Tenants Association, and really, I think, the most fierce opponent to the revitalization of Eastlake, and then became the biggest champion. Carol got a lot of bumps and bruises, so when I came many years later, I didn't have to do that. But the best advice that I got was from someone who had been on the Eastlake Foundation staff at the point that I started. She'd been there 10 years, just celebrated her 15th year. And she said to me, my second week on the job, make it a priority to go and meet Eva Davis. And this was during the time that she was still alive. And her granddaughter, Shannon Longino, is here, and many of you have probably met her. And when I first met Shannon, which was at her grandmother's funeral, Mrs. Davis moved back into the Villages of Eastlake, lived there until she died 3 years ago. And I said to Shannon, I met your grandmother. She was this sweet, remarkable lady. I find it hard to believe the stories I've heard about her. Shannon said to me, okay, you must have gone with Sharon, the colleague who told me. And she said, my grandmother was an appreciator of good-looking people. So she said, my grandmother probably gave you a big hug and a kiss. But
Miss Davis always liked a good-looking man. No question, no question.
And I'll accept the compliment from Mrs. Davis, because she welcomed me into her home, and she told me, and she knew that I had known a little bit, but she told me and she gave me good advice. We have one resident who is still there, who was the vice president of the Tenants Association back then, who I think has called me an Uncle Tom. I mean, I can run down the list of things I've been called, as Carol talks about the things that Mrs. Davis had called her, and Mrs. Davis had warned me and said that there are a lot of people who are not happy, who came back. There are a lot of people who are happy, and you need to focus on the ones who are happy. With our institutional partners, same thing. The people who ran all of the partnerships, ran the Y, the founding principle of the charter school, I can run down the list. All those people are gone. Yep. And they're a new set of leaders, some who've come before me, some who've come after me. And then the biggest thing I'd say, and I'd end on this one, is the relationship with the Atlanta public school system. So let me go ahead and say, let me preface by saying that Drew could not be as successful, and the Eastlake Foundation could not be as successful if we did not have the support in terms of the cost per student expenditure that we get from APS. It would not be possible to do this on our own. However, it's almost in some ways as difficult to build and continue to build that trust with our public school system as it was in 2000 when Drew started, as it was 2 or 3 years ago to ask them to allow us to expand our charter and enroll more students K through 8 and to start a brand new high school. And after some amount of time, you would just think, if we've been successful, the proof is there, the data points are there, you see the young people, you have a neighborhood advocating for this, how hard could it be? That, in my 21 years of working in the not-for-profit sector, was probably the hardest 2 or 3 months of the Eastlake Foundation, was going to those public meetings, getting the insults and hearing things that were not true about our work, and convincing the Atlanta Board of Ed to allow us to expand Drew Charter School.
Yeah. That was really hard. That was a hard time.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good example of the value of a community quarterback. when Drew Charter School was asked to expand to serve more children and add a high school, the request came from the parents in the community who were not happy with what their choices were. And after doing some research, the East Lake Foundation realized that there was a lot of reasons for the parents to be unhappy with what had happened in traditional public high schools. And so went forward with this movement. And I'm on the board of Drew Charter School. Danny's on the board of Drew Charter School. We by ourselves, as a board, would not have had the political heft to be able to convince the school system to do something different. Yeah. We would have been just washed away as part of the great. But the board members of the East Lake Foundation and their relationship, they mobilized and they created the political pressure and the political cover to be able to have those conversations that allowed us to make our case in an effective way. So I look at that, to me, as a really good example of the value of a community quarterback 20 years down the road, to provide those opportunities to have that kind of conversation about what's best for children as opposed to being part of the adult agenda. Don't get me started.
Carol, before you move on to your next question, I just want to quickly add, so I cannot underscore enough of what you just said, but even with the partners who are on mission with you, the benefit of having a community quarterback is having someone that remains accountable and remains eyes focused on the prize, to be able to say to the partners, even as they go through leadership change, slight mission shift, hey, this is why we all got into this work, this is what we're all working toward. So that becomes important.
Yeah, I think to add to that, when you think about the work that we're doing, and we're working with partners that all work in their own silos. Yeah. So, our mixed income housing partner is concerned with what happens in that residential space. We want to make sure we're keeping it up. We want to make sure it's full. We want to make sure we're doing our job in screening and the like. But they're not thinking about, are all these kids going to the best school? Is that the school in the neighborhood? And so trying to remind those partners at all points that, we've got to be working together if we're going to truly have environment be the impact point that the whole model is intended to be. And, we find that all the time, that we've got to go back and remind the partners that, well, that may not be your job, but it's part of what we're trying to do together. So you've got to help with your part. You've got to be able to deal with the outreach and helping us connect to the right person that may be able to take advantage of an opportunity.
Yeah, it reminds me of David Erickson. I've got too many David E's in my life right now. David Erickson from the San Francisco Federal Reserve yesterday in our conversation made the point that we as community quarterbacks bring enormous value to the table when we're working with lots of different partners, when we serve as that glue in the grease between all of them. Because what we do is reduce their risk of failure. And for some of those folks, that translates into being able to make more money. For other folks, it translates into being more impactful in the work that they want to accomplish. And so that we're bringing something really special to the table that's quantifiable and hopefully can be monetized down the road in order to be funded. But this is to me, this was one of those, oh my gosh, yes, we are the most powerful people in the room, and we need to recognize that and play that card in negotiations, because a developer will want to be part of our work because the community quarterback and all of those other partners are bringing resources to a community that will help them be more successful, and they don't have to pay for it.
Make it look good.
Exactly. Same thing for a school system. One of the reasons why Uplift Charter School changed its admissions policy is to favor children who live at the new apartments here in Fort Worth, is it helps them solve a long-standing problem. How do they ensure that as their schools become even better and higher income kids try to push in, that there's a permanent platform for low-income families to have a pathway into that school? So that partnership solved one of their problems as well. So I think that's a really important role for community quarterbacks, to be understanding the risks, the rewards, and the different incentives in place with our for-profit and not-for-profit partners, and figure out how we can bridge those gaps and create win-wins for everybody going forward. I would like to open the floor up for questions. I've got a bunch more to ask, but we've had such great response from the floor in these last sessions, I'd love to give you guys a chance. Would anybody like to ask a question at this stage? If you do, please come up to the microphone. There's at least one here, maybe just one here. All right, well, you all think about your questions, and I'm going to jump into my next one. Oh, we got one. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Laura.
So I don't know if this is really about victory, but you know, the best part about being at this conference every year is getting to connect with our peers in other cities. And I look around at Sally and Kurt and Danny and Gerry and Bill Barnett and some of the people that have been involved for years and years in these projects. What are we doing as a network to prepare for leadership transitions? Because I get asked that question a lot. You know, what happens if your board chair isn't involved anymore? What happens if you aren't involved anymore? You know, how do we make sure that the work we're doing lives beyond any one of us individually, or even as, you know, a board?
Great question. I'll start with that. And that's something that at Purpose Built we think about in terms of working with our network members on their strategic plans and operationalizing those plans. And every strategic plan ought to include something about leadership transition and what those next steps are and how we will either build or recruit new leaders to this work going forward. Honestly, with all the other challenges, I don't think we put enough time into thinking about that. And that's something that I appreciate that we're going to need to continue to be digging down into, think about how we build a pipeline of leaders for this work. Richard Barron from McCormick Barron, who's somebody I admire a lot, talks about in this kind of cross-sectoral work that there's no place you can go to school to learn how to do this. So there's not like we can go to the, you know, Columbia University School of Holistic Revitalization and hire smart young graduates out of it. And so maybe there should be down the road, because I think this is really something special. But we've got to figure out where we find next generations of leaders, where we find young people who we can groom, both in the purpose-built organization ourselves, but more importantly, I think, at the network member level. Where have you guys found good people from?
Well, I'm going to come to that question.
Okay.
No, I think part of it is really, and when you look at the purpose-built communities, there are different leadership structures, there are different partnership structures, there are different ways that people have approached the challenge. I think, you know, what we've done is we've tried to identify the best possible partners in each area and then let them do their job. So our task, and I think, you know, we're in a place where 2 years from now, when we have all the pieces in place, we're really managing our partners and holding them accountable.
Right.
And so the role that we play is a whole different role than we are playing right now. But I think, you know, what you've got to be able to do is think about what that mission, where are you in that mission? And what are the resources you need to have in order to be, you know, when we get to that accountability level, you know, we've got to be able to make sure we're gathering the right metrics, and we know what we ought to be tracking, because each of these partners is measuring in a silo instead of how do we merge that data and how do we manipulate so that we get better results. We're able to use that data instead of just collecting it and saying we've got it. So I think it's going to always be a group of people that understand the mission and want to have an impact, and they're thinking about it. You know, like we talk to funders, it's about economic benefit, but it's about social benefit. So you've got to have people that are committed to being able to be a part of the solution. And you know, there are a lot of people out there that say they want to be, but it's a lot harder to find the ones that actually will do the work.
So for me, I mentioned that neighborhoods are not static. Well, neither are healthy organizations. Eastlake has been lucky, Eastlake Foundation has been lucky. Greg Gianelli, our founding executive director, has stayed in this work. Carol was his successor, she's in this work. My predecessor was thoughtful enough that in my first few months on the job as our director of programs and partnerships, she said to me, if I'm successful, I will train you to be my successor. And when she stepped out, she left the organization, she had positioned me well to do my work, to do some of her work. And she was always honest in giving me credit when I did her work. So she built that with me, and I've always been reminded of that in my head. So I have a COO who, when I hired her, I told her, I said, if I do my job well, aside from the legacy that will be there for the Eastlake Foundation, because of the young people, because of the families, with all the data and all the metrics, just from an organizational standpoint, I told her, I said, I don't need to be I've been president now only for 2 years, but on the staff for 5. I said, I don't need to be president longer than 5 or 6 years, and maybe even that's too long. So I want to train you so that you are the natural choice. From a board standpoint, I'll be very honest to say that we are going through a strategic planning process now. My board recognizes that we have lacked diversity. We have board members who've been on the board since the beginning of the redevelopment. Our board, if you look at the profile of our board, it's white, male, and average age is probably somewhere in the late 50s.
I bet it's older than that.
Probably older, probably early.
Thank you, says the mid-50s person.
Probably you're right, Carol, probably early 60s. But I say that to say that I'm grateful for a board that in this strategic planning process is calling and pushing. We now have a nominating and governance committee. We just did that this year. We have board members, 2 of whom I'm pretty sure are younger than me, who said, when we think about diversity, it's not just race and it's not just gender, but it's also age. And we have to be thoughtful about the fact that so many of the folks on the board have been there since the beginning. Let's think about the CEOs that support the East Bay Golf Club. Everyone has heard that story. All those CEOs are just about gone.
That's right.
And so there has to be a new generation, new way to tell the story for younger people in Atlanta, millennials and other folks who, are coming into positions of power and influence. So to Laura's point, that the succession planning has to happen, otherwise our organizations in this work could die on the vine.
That's right. Well,
Forget
and-
succession planning, I just need staff.
So I will share one of the ways that Purpose Built has found great young staff members is looking at the Teach for America Alumni Network. Because we are a small organization, we don't have a big human resources function. So we're fishing in that pool because that pool is a lot of high quality young people who've already been vetted through an incredibly complicated and competitive process, who've already proven that they're really committed to doing this kind of work and want to see community change take place. And so that's been a really rich pool for us to fish in. But it's not the only pool, it's one. And so I might suggest to you that if you're looking to find staff or boards, board members, be thinking about those other pools to fish in, where you might find people who bring at least a part of the skill set that you will need, and then you can train them up on the rest of it going forward. Other question right now. I can't see if we've got a microphone. Nope. I have a question for each of you. So, almost a year, 10 years, 20 years, what does your future look like? And what are you even able to think about the future beyond next week?
Yeah, I mean, we're still very much in the incubating stage of our plan.
Mm-hmm.
And, what we hope to do in the next 6 to 9 months is really, we've done some community engagement, but really put in place a process that is vigorous, and that, because we really believe that obviously the community is the key to the answer, and they have the magic within them to figure this out. It's just us either not getting in their way or being there to kind of assist them. So, listening and really is kind of on our agenda for the next 6 to 9 months, and then also getting our own internal structures in place.
Excellent. Gerry?
Well, I think the first issue is finishing out the model, which we see that happening in the next couple of years, and that changes our mission.
When you said that, you mean finishing out kind of the capital piece of the model?
Putting all the pieces in place,
Yeah.
so that we have the partners doing the work that they need to do. I think it then changes, we talk about early education, obviously we have a huge focus on it, we know how important it is. But the children are the easy part. I mean, we know what we have to do about the children. It's thinking about how do we deal with those 15-year-olds that are 3 years behind? How do we deal with the parents that, we're trying to help them improve employment, but I think the focus tends not to be there. It tends to be on well, we know we can impact these children. And so how do we provide the wraparound? So you're really helping family. And I think that's really where the focus will switch over time is really thinking about whole family and not just changing that group that we know in 20 years are going to be, successful. They're going to be the future leaders. But how do we make sure that the environment they're in and the support system they have is the best it can be.
So more intentionality around kind of whole family or dual two-generation strategies in order to be able to support everybody moving forward.
And the other thing for us is having the pieces in place to have the sustainability of the model. Having our golf course revenues, having our commercial revenues, making it so that it's not as hard to be, we don't have to be out rattling the cup every day, trying to make sure that we can pay for operations. And I think, that takes a lot of pressure off. When we have those pieces in place so we can think about where's the focus, it'll be a different day.
Danny.
Yeah. So 5 years out, and I think about so much of our timeline in terms of the people that we serve, but 5 years out, we will have had 4 graduating classes of 12th graders from our brand new high school. So that's very exciting to me. 5 years out, and Don, correct me, Don Duran, who's the head of school for Drew Charter Schools in the back, but 5 years out from now, our young people who would have started with us in our early learning pipeline, our 3 and 4-year-old programs, I think will be 10th graders in high school. And I don't take for granted that I have this amazing opportunity from the time that I started at the East Lake Foundation 5 years ago to start hearing the stories, even though I've not seen them from the beginning, of young people and their families who they say, oh, I started at Drew Charter School in kindergarten. Marilyn Hack, who you'll hear from in just a moment, her daughter Therese graduated high school, and Drew didn't exist as a high school when she graduated, but she started Drew in kindergarten. And so to be able to see that kind of lifespan of a young person to go through their entire public education experience. Some of the programs that we've incubated, that I've seen, that East Lake Foundation has incubated, will now live with the partners. So we have very quickly a health program. I very intentionally co-located the staff, the 4 people that run that health program, in the Y. 5 years from now, that program needs to be owned by the Y. And it doesn't mean that the East Lake Foundation doesn't raise money for it anymore or support it, but it means that the Y has to really see and embrace it as part of their work and not something that they have to do for the initiative. And I can run down the list, but there are very clear benchmarks in my mind that I look at 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years out.
Like that. Is there something that you all wish that you had known when you started? Jerry? I'm almost afraid to ask you that.
Yeah, really. Yeah, careful what you ask for. No, I mean, I think we didn't know how hard it was going to be. Mike Rodriguez and I would talk about it, and we talked about 5 years. What was going to happen in 5 years. We were going to have all the housing in place, golf course, schools. It's 10 years later, and we're still working on those things. And I think the other side is, we had the benefit of a tremendous amount of capital that was brought to New Orleans post-Katrina. But how some of that was deployed, our school system was given $2 billion to build schools back. And they were supposed to build all the schools back. And they've built 60%, and they've spent the $2 billion. And we've got still great need. It changes how we approach things. Our argument about public-private partnerships is a lot stronger, and people understand it a lot better when they realize there's no more public money. But I think it's something that you have to go in eyes wide open and recognize that you're not going to know everything when you start, and it's going to be an evolution.
We'll make you keep standing there. So thank you for standing up. Love to hear your question.
Sure. I'm Phil Hissam with the Polis Institute. I led the community engagement effort for Lift Orlando. And the question is centered around, I've heard y'all mention economic opportunity, and so the income part of the victory matrix, but it's not one of the 3 main pillars, and that was something that was suspiciously absent for some of the residents we were talking to, and then Lyft added that as a 4th, economic opportunity and some metrics around income and improvements in that. So could you talk about its lack in the 3, why it's not there, and the and potentials for including it? So.
Well, I would argue it is in there. It's part of community health and wellness. And if we would think of health and wellness writ large, and part of being healthy is being financially healthy and having a healthy enough income to be sustainable and to feel like you're moving forward. So we embed it in health and wellness and chose not to call it out as a separate pillar. Other folks have said, well, what about transportation? What about, economic development? And we ultimately decided that we needed 3 strong pillars, and that health and wellness was sufficiently broad that it would include things like financial stability, financial income. That's one of the things that we measure in terms of success. Are our families making more money than they did in the old days? And so I'm completely with you and with your team as that being an important measure of family success. Are our families' incomes going up? Are they hopefully gaining wealth in this process? So I'm with you there.
That's good. So I'd love to hear just like maybe a quick example of sort of like from each of you, just like what's been the sort of either a highlight sort of program or sort of a success story in that sort of arena, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Well, I'd make 2 points. One, to your point, when we had our initial conversations with schools and we were interfacing with KIPP 9 years ago, and we've come full circle and are getting ready to partner with KIPP. We had a young school leader that was about 26, and he's listening to the mixed income model conversation, and he's like, well, we don't want to be in this community because we only want to serve the poorest of the poor. And that's our audience. And I said, well, what happens when we help that family improve from being the poorest of the poor? Do they have to not participate in KIPP? What is our collective objective? It goes back to the silos. If you're thinking about educating only the poorest of the poor, are you really doing what's the best work? Or are you helping the families work their way out of poverty as well? Are you providing the opportunities? And so from a program standpoint, I think the one that's probably been the most of greatest impact is we did a childhood development associate program, which is teaching basically the lowest level of early education training. In New Orleans, there are I think 3,000 early education teachers, and only a third of those have that lowest level childhood development associate degree. And so we've had 2 programs. We've trained about 20 teachers, and 6 of those have ended up working for us in Educare. They've been able to gain employment. They've actually looked at how do they take the next coursework so that they can qualify to be, to move into the second slot in the classroom instead of the third. And I think those are the types of opportunities that, they're not only job training, but they relate to the rest of the work. And I think people are able to see that and say, one, I'm bettering myself, but I'm also able to have an impact in the community and be a contributor.
Dan, you want to jump in?
Sure. So in terms of our work, Carol said it well in the way that we consider community wellness. So we have 3 programs. Really quickly, our Start Me Eastlake program is a micro accelerator program to support entrepreneurs who are committed to starting businesses in the Eastlake community. And that's been tremendous. We have only been a year into that program, but we are the second site for Emory University, their business school, because they started in another community in the Metro Atlanta area. Our second program is our First Tee, the First Tee of Eastlake. And it's a great example of how you think about community wellness in the broadest sense. So this is a program that teaches young people golf skills, but also life skills based on 9 core values. So we're not looking to produce the world's next best golfers, which we happen to do sometimes. And there are some young people who've gotten full rides to colleges on golf scholarships. But it's about producing the next great generation of citizens. Last but not least, and most grounded in our work in this pillar, is our resident community support program. And we're doing things like having residents, supporting residents, connecting them to resources, things like benefit screenings, so that they know and get connected to things like earned income tax credit, child care subsidy, heating, utility assistance, that sort of stuff, entrepreneurship classes. The biggest thing that I'd probably say that we do there is, again, connect residents to existing resources One great example is a partnership that the program has with DeKalb County. They have a workforce bus. Workforce bus didn't have enough places to be. We invited them to come to the East Side community, so once a month that bus brings with it 10 or 15 additional computers beyond the 2 or 3 that we have in the leasing office, and an employer who does a job fair on the bus. So that was a resource, again, that the county had that they really was having trouble getting out and connecting the neighborhoods, that we were able to come and say, come to our neighborhood. The last bit I won't tell you, because Marilyn, who stepped back in the room, Marilyn, just raise your hand. Marilyn is a proud product of our resident community support program and that career development series, and I'm sure in her remarks in the next session she'll talk about the impact of that on her and her family.
Do you still work with the Center for Working Families?
Yeah. We don't. So not in any formal way, but because the Center for Working Families, again, is a rich resource in Atlanta that's constantly looking for residents in Atlanta to access. Whenever we have a resident that we know has a need that can be met by the center, we refer them.
Great, thank you.
And I would just say, I think workforce development for us is going to be at the crux of what we do, mainly because our community is primarily based of low-wage, minimum-wage workers who are coming in at entry-level jobs because they don't speak any English. So then our challenge is, how do you then take these, put the structures in place so that they can get certified, or in many cases with the refugees, recertified, because they're actually coming in with a lot of professional degrees but that have no value in the U.S. So how do you take skills they have, certify them in the U.S. market? I mean, we're blessed with, oil and gas, huge industry, and medical, and there's a lot of opportunity in both of those arenas for middle skills jobs. So that's really, we're looking at a couple different models of how to get there, but I think that'll be a very important piece.
Thank you, thanks. It is time for us to wrap up, and so as I sit here and think about what are the themes that emerged from today, I hear a few. Number one, it's harder than you think it's going to be. It takes longer than you think it's going to take. Victory may not ever be achieved, but this work is most important.
So go get them.
Yeah, but this work is incredibly important, and we make progress every single day. And so I would end with thinking about, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the very, very, very good. Keep moving forward. Thank